This episode of Writing Excuses has been brought to you by our listeners, patrons, and friends. If you would like to learn how to support this podcast, visit www.patreon.com/writingexcuses. Season 19, Episode 25. This is Writing Excuses. From the classroom to the page.
I'm Erin.
I'm Marshall.
I'm Mary Robinette.
And I wanted us to have this wild card, partly so that we could grill Marshall a little bit, who finished an MFA program recently.
I did.
About all the things that you learned. Please repeat them to us. No. And actually, how do you take all the things you learn in the classroom for people who are listening on this podcast and actually turn it into something you're doing when you're writing?
I think it depends on for me, it depended on how I started, why I started the program in the first place. I started the program to make myself make the time to write because I really wanted to get as much as I could out of it. I was paying the money. I had some amazing instructors, and my goal was to figure out how to make writing a bigger part of my life amidst all of the chaos already that's teaching full-time, parenting, and all of that. And I'll be honest, I graduated in August of 2023, and I took a break from writing for a little bit. And a lot of what I was doing is soaking in some of that stuff that I learned and trying to figure out how to go back to a schedule and remember that I can do this. And the big part is keeping that connection with my community as well. And keeping that motivation going. Now, specifics, it also, I think, depends on the type of class you're taking. In the beginning, we were taking a lot of classes around different genres. So I personally now, just as one example, am trying to incorporate some of the studying of mystery and romance and those elements and those beats and stuff like that into my science fiction and my fantasy that I'm writing, because I love those genres so much. And I may or may not be working on a mystery / sci-fi novel right now. So it's fun to kind of think about, I learned all these specific things, studied all this work, but I really want to figure out how to make it my own now.
I like something that you said, which is I think a piece that a lot of people miss, which is that after you've learned something, that it takes a while to internalize it. And I see a lot of people who will take a workshop and afterwards they stop writing, but they never start again. It's not an intentional break. And some of that is that I think that they aren't thinking about the action of internalizing, that takes time and it takes energy.
Yeah, and part of the clarity, to clarify kind of what I was saying, why I'm taking a break too, is when at the end of the program, I ended up with a pretty decent draft of a novel. So at this point, I'm trying to make another pass at it, and I want to start querying agents because I really want to try to get something out there. I've been working on this for years and years and years. I finally went back to school. I'm teaching creative writing to high schoolers. I'm trying to get a job teaching at the college level, and also I want to publish something. So it's going to be that editing work and that revision work and putting myself out there. And that's terrifying. So,
yeah. Yes, it does not stop being terrifying, honestly. But I think one of the things that I find is that the motivation shifts, that when you're in class, and I see this also a lot where I will have a student and they come and they talk about how they had written all of this while they were in their MFA and they can't find the motivation to write afterwards. And I find this for myself, that I go to a writing workshop, and after the writing workshop, it's hard to find that motivation because, it's there was a deadline, there was body modeling, there was a teacher that I didn't want to let down. So I had all of this external motivation. And then when you're cut loose from that, you suddenly have to find internal motivation, which is a whole different racket.
Or just different forms of external motivation. Yeah. One of the things
money.
That money is a big one.
Back to money.
But also like I've been in groups with people. That's why people have critique groups sometimes. It's that you want to continue to have people you can disappoint, because the disappointment of others, such a driver in life, maybe just my life. But that way there's something else. There's another deadline. There's another way to make yourself do things. And I think that's one good thing that you can actually take from the classroom. That's not a direct lesson that you're taught. So it's not something that your teacher tells you. It's more how you learn well. What are the kinds of things that work well for you? Are there exercises you did in class where you were like, doing 6 short flash pieces really got my engine going? Or, I was much better when I was able to do a back and forth on email with my professor about this particular part of my novel. And then you can say, how can I create those same structures in my life now? Like, where are people that I can reach out to who can fill that role in my life?
Yeah, and we're all at different stages. I talk to my cohort. We're all really close. We get on Zoom here and there and kind of try to bring each other up. And a lot of us are all in different places in that journey. It's like, are you writing? Are you working on this? Are you working on a new project? But something you said earlier, is there a specific lesson? It wasn't necessarily a specific lesson for me, but it was the way they structured the thesis project that worked really well for me. I really like just sitting down and writing, but I noticed that when I outline, I'm more productive. And in the thesis process, there was multiple outline stages. It wasn't like, okay, throw this outline together, and then just start writing. I changed stuff as I went, and we had amazing advisors that supported us, but that kind of living outline and keeping up with that and tracking character wants and needs and arcs and relationships and that kind of thing as I wrote really changed how I plan on approaching novel writing going forward. And I think without that, I'd probably get stuck pretty quickly, because now I know I can lean back on that structural part of it that wasn't in my toolbox before.
I find that so when I started writing, I have talked about this on the podcast before, that I would write a story that had a really good beginning, a really good middle, and a really good end to 3 completely different stories that happened to have the same cast of characters.
I kind of want to read those.
Yeah, that sounds amazing.
That's probably a roller coaster ride right there.
No, they're just not. They're just like,
you're like, it's not.
It's not. No, the story ends and you're like, that was the ending? They just kind of stop. So for me, the thing that I had to learn, like the practice that I had to learn was structure. And so I had to spend a lot of time doing very intentional practice on learning structures. So I would do thumbnail sketches where I would just write beginning, middle, and end for things that would fit on 3x5 cards, just to get this sense of, okay, making sure that all of those things were actually connected. And that craft, having that craft to lean on, is very helpful to me now at a point where I have internalized structure and I can just write and trust that I'm going to have that beginning, middle, and end. But when I'm having a bad brain day, having the tool, having the craft to reach for and being able to articulate what that craft is has been incredibly useful. Did you find when you were doing your sessions that there was any way that, like, were there things that you found that made it easier for you to start internalizing things, or for you to identify the things that you needed to internalize?
What do you mean? Sorry.
So like
after the program, you mean?
After the program, or even during the program, it's like, oh, this is a really good tool that I'm having to use consciously right now. But at some point, it won't have to think about it. Yeah,
I mean, like I said, I was really lucky to have some awesome instructors. So one of the classes we actually took was short forms, and the number of short stories I have now, I'm really thankful for. But short stories are really difficult to do well. So internalizing some of the feedback from my workshops and my instructors was kind of not the challenge, but just making sure that as soon as the workshop was over, I made some notes. I look back at my work relatively soon after, just so I could, okay, so when I go back to revise, this character was flat because of this reason, or the feedback on the ending was it was too abrupt and I didn't, I didn't, the promises weren't kept at the end, things like that.
One of the things that I really enjoyed doing when I did workshopping in my MFA program was to actually take so people will write things on the paper, like you give them your story, they write marks all over it, and then they give it back to you. And I would put all like the page 1s together, all the page 2s together, all the page 3s together, and then actually just kind of like flip through them and look for where everyone, like if everyone highlighted a sentence and was like, amazing, I'd be like, that is a good sentence. If everyone wrote question marks in the same corner of a page, I was like, maybe that is confusing. And it was a way to actually make, because for workshop can be hard for people because sometimes, it can feel like people are coming for you. I generally enjoy it because I'm like, I just forced like X number of people to read my work and talk about it. So I'm like,
I wish I could think about it that way.
You, but even so, like when you take it and look at it like in aggregate, like then it's a lot easier to look at the patterns and not get stuck in one particular person's feedback, but look at like where those systems happen. And it made it a lot easier for me to figure out then what were the kinds of things that I was doing that I kept getting flagged for, that were the things that maybe I should internalize, looking at my own work in aggregate, and what were the things that kept coming up over and over again.
I love that technique. I also look for patterns. And as you were talking, I'm like, oh, because I use Google Docs and everyone will comment, like you can easily see that everybody's commenting in the same spot. I have to go through and clear them so that people aren't commenting because other people have commented, but that's a whole other thing. So,
well, something Erin said too, workshopping was always a really terrifying thing for me. It still is. But throughout the course of the program, I figured out, kind of like what you were saying, I get all this feedback. And depending on the story and depending on and how well I knew these people, some of the feedback, it was to being able to take the feedback that mattered the most. Not that some people's feedback didn't matter, but it was just like, okay, this person is confused because they don't really like fantasy, and they've told me that. And I get it, they don't understand this element, but everybody else really liked this element. So I can put this person's feedback aside and focus on the clusters of stuff. So being able to take that and having the confidence to eventually get a writing group together and willingly go forward and workshop things together. That's what that's what I'm moving up to. So
something that you said earlier that I just want to circle back to that I really liked was that you would make notes about what you had learned. And I find that that's one of the best ways for me to solidify things is to write them down, because I have to articulate them. And one of the reasons that I love teaching and love doing the podcast is because when I have to explain it to someone else, that's one of the best ways for me to start internalizing it myself, because now I'm taking words that someone else has said and I'm internalizing them. I have to, in order to be able to express it in my own language. And that for me is one of the ways that I will try to put into practice things that I'm learning after taking a class. Speaking of after, we're going to pause here. And then when we come back, we're going to talk about some other ways that you can go from the classroom to the page.
Hey writers, are you thinking about learning a new language? I think exploring the world, experiencing other cultures, and being able to communicate with people outside your everyday experience lets you create richer, better stories. A great way to do that is with Rosetta Stone, a trusted expert for over 30 years with millions of users and 25 languages offered. They use an immersive technique which leads to fast language acquisition. It's an intuitive process that helps you really learn to speak, listen, and most of all think in the language you're trying to learn. They also feature true accent speech recognition technology that gives you feedback on your pronunciation. It's like having a voice coach in your home. Learn at home or on the go with a desktop and mobile app that let you download and access lessons even when you're offline. And it's an amazing value. A lifetime membership gives you access to all 25 languages, including Spanish, French, Italian, German, Japanese, and, of course, Korean. Don't put off learning that language. There's no better time than right now to get started. For a very limited time, Writing Excuses listeners can get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership for 50% off. Visit rosettastone.com/today. That's 50% off unlimited access to 25 language courses for the rest of your life. Redeem your 50% off at rosettastone.com/today.
The Fall of the House of Usher, created by Mike Flanagan from various stories and poems by Edgar Allan Poe, is some of the best storytelling I've ever seen on TV. It's horror, full of jump scares, dread, and, well, horrific things, but it opens in media res to diffuse the tension, or at least to get us to let down our guard. In the first 10 minutes, we learn that all of CEO Roderick Usher's children have died. So, hey, that's cool. We know who will live and who will die, so we can relax and enjoy the ride, right? That was my thinking, and right or wrong, I'm happy to let you think that too. Yes, there are some surprises, but relax. What really carries this series is the outstanding performances upon the brilliant script. The words, they are delicious, like lemons, so very lemon. The show carries a TV MA rating due to language, sex, smoking, substances, suicide, and violence, and that rating unfortunately omits the fact that there's also some violence to animals, especially in episodes 3 and 4. The internet has spoilers and explainers if you're concerned. I watched the entire 8-episode run 4 times in an 8-week period. Once for fun, once for more fun, and twice more so I could learn things while watching other people see it for the first time. So I guess all 4 times were for fun.
So one of the other techniques that I am a big fan of is taking a chance. I don't know about you all, but I've been in classes where the teacher is talking. I'm like, well, this is some bullshit.
As a teacher, I know for a fact there are a lot of students thinking about that about me a lot of the time.
Yep, same, absolutely.
Most because they don't want to be there, but continue.
Yeah, and what I've learned is that if I go in and think that I am going to get nothing out of the class, but if I think, okay, let me just try this thing that they're talking about, even if I think it is completely absurd and not going to be useful, I will get something out of that, even when it's not the thing that they intend for me to get out of it. So I think of it as auditioning a change or auditioning a technique.
Yeah. Also, one of the things I'm now remembering that they had us do in my program was we write these annotations where we would try to like analyze a story for what it's doing while doing our close readings of our own. And one thing they suggested was to do a few close readings of things you hate, like books and stories that you're like, this story, I would burn it. But you don't burn books, don't do that. But like, and figure out why. And I think the same is true for techniques. Like occasionally somebody tells you to do something or asks you to do an exercise and you're just like, who knows, maybe one of our homeworks, you're like, not feeling it, dog. But it's nice to kind of try it and see what is it about it that you're reacting to so strongly.
Yeah.
Is it because like it goes counter to the way that you think about storytelling? Is it just because you're in a bad mood that day? What is it that's going on? And if you can identify that, anything you feel that strongly about, there's probably something there that you can use for yourself.
Yeah. I'm just going to use a concrete example of this kind of thing. I took a workshop and the instructor said to put all 5 senses on every page. And we were doing standard manuscript format. So this is 250 words and all 5 senses on every page. And I'm like, well, that's extreme. I mean, I agree that you should use all 5 senses, but that's extreme. And I don't think that. So I did it. And then when they started critiquing, the instructor said, I started reading your story and I just fell asleep. And first of all, you should never say that to a student.
That's horrible.
But second, they were right. It was really boring and it was hard to tell what was going on. And I knew as I was writing it that it was a problem. But I was like, they told me to do this. And what I realized was that by putting all 5 senses on the page, I was making everything in there of equal value and that I could use the senses to anchor things that were important, that when I put in a sense that it was going to ground the reader and that if I reserved those for the important things, that it was significantly more powerful. So I would not have come to that understanding if I hadn't tried this technique that I hated. that is, I think, why it's worthwhile to audition stuff. And I love this idea of doing a close read of things you hate.
I hear, see, and smell you.
Just do not taste me, please.
So one of the things that when Aaron was talking a minute ago, I thought about was at the end, the tail end of the program, my program was the thesis project, right? Mm-hmm. And we're working on this novel. We've been leading up to it. And they paired us up with a thesis advisor. Mm. And I got really lucky to work with an awesome writer. His name is Aize Jama Everett, and he rocks. But his style of suggesting things to me was kind of what Mary Robinette was saying. I feel like he's like, hey, have you thought about this thing? Have you thought about maybe this character responds this way instead or something? The way he suggested things wasn't like, you need to change X, Y, and Z because I hate this character. It was like, well, this character is really interesting. And then he made a suggestion about a character who doesn't have a POV in the book, but he does at the very, very end. And he goes, what if this is this character's story? And I said, okay, that felt really daunting. And it really is his story. Mm-hmm. But it's not his story yet. And it's not his POV now. And that really helped me power to the end of it because I knew what I was leading up to. I knew that character at the end was going to step into his own, and then it was going to be about him, more about him, all about him.
I love the way that you there are two things that you've said, maybe more than that, where where it feels like you're keeping a really open mind. Like there you sort of were like, no, because not just like, nah, I'm not doing that, but like, let me consider it and figure out why it isn't working. And then way at the beginning, you were talking about using other genres. Yeah. And I think sometimes people, you get really comfortable in the genre that and school is a time when often you will have to read or work with or try out genres and formats that just may not work for you. Like some people don't like writing short fiction and may never, but the exercise of trying it, maybe you take a little bit out of that in terms of the way that you write a sentence to try to get as much as you can and make it dense. And you can use that in a part in your novel in which things are really emotional and heavy. So I think that it's great that you did that as opposed to being like mystery, whatever, well, instead you brought it into what you were doing.
And the result actually, by the time I got to that thesis project was I knew I wanted to write a Black space opera. And then I'm like, but the alienness of I wanted horror elements. I knew, and I know it's not all the way working yet. But when I go back again, I really want to make that, I want to make it terrifying at certain points, and it's not a horror novel, but the enemy is horrifying. So I want to make sure that I want the reader to feel a certain way when the characters that we're supposed to love, and I hope they do, encounter those things.
Yeah, I actually really hate and love at the same time that moment when you can feel that something is not right because at that point it has shifted from being into being a known unknown. Yeah. It's like, that there's a problem there. You don't know exactly what the problem is, which is so much better than, I don't know if this is any good. It's like, yeah, this is good. There is an opportunity here. And just interrogating it and trying to figure out what that opportunity is and how you can get into it. Sometimes I will do, I have this intentional practice thing that I do where it's like reverse engineering an outline, but I will, and I will also say it is a thing that I discovered as a teaching technique. And then realized that it was actually incredibly useful, which is I go through and I highlight the things in the story that are like load-bearing and important in a scene. And then I kind of categorize them based on Mice Quotient, which for people who are listening to this in isolation is an organizational structure, milieu, inquiry, character, event. And so I do that and then I can see, actually the bulk of this scene is this event shift, this status quo shift. But when I come into the scene, I'm not signaling, I'm not doing anything about that. And there's a whole bunch of me figuring out what I'm writing. And I knew it was flabby, but I couldn't figure out why it was flabby. And I love this is one of the reasons that I love teaching is because it gives you these tools that you can use and then do some intentional practice on your own work.
And that was one of the shifts I feel like as a cohort we got to really in a heightened way. Like our instructors at some point, I feel like we're kind of sitting back and letting us discuss each other's work in such a way. We would come to it, like I said, being like, well, I know something's not working. You know, we would tag a couple questions to a short story. I mean, like, I feel like this character is this, or I don't feel like this part of it isn't working. And when we came back to discuss and workshop it, the language we used, the feedback we were able to give each other was invaluable. I mean, at that point, because we had all leveled up in such a way, we were able to look at each other's work and know each other's work well enough to be like, okay, I hear what you're saying, but I actually think it works. But I think what really you're missing is this. Mm-hmm. And those conversations are something I'll never forget about being in this program. And of course, we made plenty of excuses to get together early before residency and stuff like that, so we could have more of those conversations. But that's part of that community thing. So.
Well, speaking of community, I think it is time for us to give you some homework.
Yes, I have the homework, which is for you to become the teacher. And so what I'd like you to do is find something that maybe you're struggling with in your work, something that you're not completely sure about. Maybe it's POV, who knows? Maybe it's voice, maybe it's one of these things. And think, how would you try to teach this concept to someone else? And what homework would you assign them?
This has been Writing Excuses. You're out of excuses, now go write. Writing Excuses has been brought to you by our listeners, patrons, and friends. Your hosts for this episode of Writing Excuses were Mary Robinette Kowal, Aaron Roberts, with special guest Marshall Carr Jr. This episode was engineered by Marshall Carr Jr., mastered by Alex Jackson, and produced by Emma Reynolds. For more information, visit writingexcuses.com.